So a few years ago I created a channel, but I didn't do a whole lot with it and there wasn't much content on it. But there was one video of the Raj that people seemed to enjoy, and so all that I did is put this little disclaimer here, and I also changed the intro to this channel's intro, and I also edited the end card. So anyway, here's the video.
When one thinks of the British Empire, colonies and dominions across the world are some of the first things to come to mind. The jewel in the crown, and one of the most well-known of all of them, is India. This week we're looking at crown rule in the subcontinent after the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 and 58. Since there's so much on the British in India, our focus will begin in 1858 and the years beyond. Originally, British involvement on the subcontinent of India was just mere trading operations created and managed by the British East India Company. The sphere of influence of the company continued to grow since it was founded in the 17th century. Over 250 years later, the British East India Company controlled most of India, either directly or indirectly through princely states. On the 10th of May, 1857, the Bengal Army garrison at Meerut, 40 miles north of Delhi, revolted, killing their European officers as well as civilians, both native and European, especially ones who were employed by the British officers and their families. Tensions had been rising, and one of the final acts leading towards the mutiny was when the sepoys heard a rumor that the P-1853 Enfield rifle cartridges were purposely using cow and pig grease that would spiritually defile them and their caste. By the end of the rebellion the next year, the British East India Company was liquidated and direct control of India was transferred to the British Crown. Queen Victoria said of the transfer, "We hold ourselves bound to the natives of our Indian territories by the same obligation of duty which bind us to all our other subjects." This new form of British rule in India was called the British Raj. In 1858, the British Raj comprised itself of modern-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Burma, though in 1887 Burma became its own province of British India, and in 1937 it became its own separately administered colony. The administrative government in India was headed by the Viceroy and Governor-General, who was appointed by the sovereign on advisement from the government in Britain. The Viceroy was to be the sovereign's representative for the affairs there for a 5-year term. He would be instructed on the exercising of his duties by the Secretary of State for India, the head of the India Office in London. The India Office itself had been created in 1858 to oversee British India's administration. The direct administration was the Viceroy and his subordinates. The Viceroy was advised on the use of his executive and legislative powers through his council, appointed by the sovereign, but also by the Viceroy himself. Many of the individual provinces within British India were headed by governors or lieutenant governors, the governors appointed by Parliament and the lieutenant governors by the Viceroy. Although vast swaths of India were controlled directly by the British, there were many places that were princely states, usually ruled by a prince, hence the name. The large princely states were overseen by the Viceroy and the government of British India, whereas the small ones would be overseen by the provincial governors, through an agent or some body like that. At the end of British rule in India in 1947, there were over 500 different princely states within India. These states made up nearly half of India's land area and a little over a quarter of its population. Laws in British India followed the legislation that was enacted by Parliament in London, as well as the legislation by the government in India, by both the central government in the Indian capital and on local levels. However, the courts of princely states followed the statutes of their respective leaders. Since 1858, Calcutta had been the capital of India, located in West Bengal, only 50 miles west from the current India-Bangladeshi border. But in December of 1911, during King George V's visit at the Delhi Darbar, it was announced that the capital would be moved to Delhi. The government of British India felt it would be logistically easier to administer the Indian Empire from the north-central location of Delhi. At the Darbar, King George laid the cornerstone of what would become New Delhi. The construction of the capital was slow to take place, as just a little over 2 years later, the First World War broke out. After the war, construction resumed, and in February of 1931, it was completed, and ceremonies commenced by the Viceroy, who was then Lord Irwin. Now, we just brought up the First World War, but I believe it's imperative to swing back around, as Indian troops played a huge and vital role in the First World War. The Indian Army troops were some of the first soldiers on the Western Front after the decimation of the regular British Army post-Mons. They not only fought on the Western Front, but they also fought in German East Africa and in Mesopotamia, and they fought just as gallantly as any of their other Commonwealth comrades. During the First World War, 74,000 Indian troops would lose their lives. Once again, in the Second World War, Indian soldiers answered the call to arms. At the start of the war in 1939, the British Indian Army had a little over 205,000 men. By the end in 1945, they had 2.5 million volunteers, the largest all-volunteer force of the war. They fought the Japanese in Asia, fighting to repulse them from Burma whilst also defending India. They not only fought in Asia, though. Just as in the First World War, they fought all over the world, fighting the Nazis in both Europe and in North Africa. And over 80,000 members of the Indian forces were killed during the war. That number is derived of British Indian soldiers along with Nepalese soldiers. Nepal itself had been a British protectorate since 1815. The Indian Army was also present for the liberation of Singapore and Hong Kong after the Japanese surrender in 1945. I think that the simple words of Field Marshal Sir Claude Auchinleck, Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Army, says it best. We couldn't have come through both world wars if it hadn't been for the Indian Army. I think this quote, simple but effective, shows the importance of the Indian Army during the World Wars. In 1947, British India was given its independence. It was partitioned and the dominions of both India and Pakistan were created. A few years later, both would become republics with full autonomy, India as the Republic of India and Pakistan as the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The process of partitioning and independence was not smooth at all. There was widespread violence, rioting, and revolting in India, and partition was rushed ahead by many months. Tensions between India and Pakistan are high and have been so ever since partitioning in 1947. The two states continue to be part of the Commonwealth of Nations to this day.